The rain drummed against the windows of the Philadelphia Historical Society as Dr. Rachel Chen carefully unpacked the latest donation from the Kellerman estate. As a specialist in early 20th century photography and women's history, Rachel had examined thousands of family photographs. But something about this particular collection felt different from the moment she opened the first box. The Kellerman family had been prominent in Philadelphia society for generations, and their photographic collection spanned nearly 50 years. Most images were typical of well-to-do families from the era: formal portraits, social gatherings, and carefully staged domestic scenes that projected prosperity and respectability. But it was a single photograph, nestled between layers of tissue paper near the bottom of the third box, that made Rachel pause. The image showed a young woman, perhaps 25 years old, sitting in an ornate Victorian parlor. She wore a pristine white dress with delicate lace details, her dark hair perfectly arranged in the Gibson girl style popular in 1910. In her arms, she cradled an infant, perhaps 6 months old, dressed in an elaborate christening gown. At first glance, it appeared to be a touching maternal portrait, the kind of photograph wealthy families commissioned to celebrate new motherhood. The woman's smile was radiant, her eyes gazing down at the baby with what appeared to be pure maternal joy. The composition was professionally executed, with soft lighting that emphasized the intimacy of the mother-child bond. Yet something about the photograph unsettled Rachel. Despite the woman's brilliant smile and the tenderness of her pose, there was something in her expression that didn't quite align with the scene's apparent happiness. The smile, while technically perfect, seemed to require enormous effort to maintain. More troubling still, Rachel noticed that the woman's grip on the baby appeared unusually tight. Her knuckles slightly white where her hands pressed against the infant's clothing. The back of the photograph bore only a simple inscription: Eleanor and James, June 1910. No family name, no photographer's stamp, no additional context to explain the subtle but unmistakable tension Rachel sensed in what should have been a joyful maternal portrait. Rachel spent the morning examining the photograph under various lighting conditions and magnifications. Her years of training had taught her to look beyond the obvious composition to detect the subtle emotional undercurrents that photographers sometimes captured unintentionally. What she discovered only deepened her sense that something was fundamentally wrong with this seemingly perfect maternal scene. Under magnification, several details became more pronounced and disturbing. The woman's smile, while broad and apparently joyful, showed signs of strain around her eyes and jaw. The muscles in her face appeared tense, as if holding the expression required significant conscious effort. More concerning was the rigidity in her posture. She sat almost unnaturally straight, with her shoulders held in a position that suggested extreme tension rather than the relaxed comfort expected in a maternal portrait. The baby, too, seemed oddly positioned. While infant photography of the era often showed babies in formal poses, this child appeared unusually still, almost unnaturally so. The infant's hands, visible at the edges of the christening gown, seemed limp in a way that struck Rachel as unusual for a 6-month-old child. But it was the woman's hands that provided the most troubling details. Her grip on the baby was indeed tight, not the gentle protective hold of a loving mother, but something closer to restraint. Her left hand, partially visible beneath the baby's gown, showed white knuckles and tensed fingers that suggested she was gripping something with considerable force. Rachel photographed these details and enlarged them on her computer screen. The more she studied the image, the more convinced she became that she was looking at a woman who was desperately trying to maintain a facade of maternal happiness while experiencing something entirely different underneath. The professional quality of the photograph suggested it had been taken by one of Philadelphia's established portrait studios, which would have maintained detailed records of their sessions. Rachel made a note to research photography studios operating in Philadelphia in 1910, hoping to identify the photographer and potentially uncover more information about the session that had produced this deeply unsettling image. Something had been terribly wrong when this photograph was taken, and the evidence was preserved forever in what appeared to be a celebration of new motherhood. Rachel spent the afternoon in the Historical Society's genealogy archives, searching for information about the Kellerman family and any connections to women named Eleanor who had given birth around 1910. The Kellerman family records were extensive, documenting 3 generations of Philadelphia society involvement, but finding specific information about an Eleanor proved more challenging than expected. The breakthrough came when Rachel discovered a family Bible tucked away in the Kellerman papers. The genealogical records showed that Eleanor Kellerman had married Robert Kellerman in 1909, when she was 24 years old. The marriage had been considered quite advantageous for both families. Robert was the heir to a successful shipping business, and Eleanor came from a respectable family with connections to Philadelphia's social elite. But the Bible's birth records told a troubling story. Eleanor's first child, James, was listed as born in June 1910, exactly when the photograph would have been taken. However, a disturbing detail appeared in the margins of the page. Someone had written, "Died July 1910," in different ink, apparently added sometime after the original entry. Rachel's pulse quickened as she cross-referenced this information with Philadelphia's public records. Death certificates from July 1910 showed that James Kellerman, infant son of Robert and Eleanor, had died at 7 months of age. The official cause of death was listed as respiratory failure, but no additional details were provided. More puzzling was what Rachel found in Eleanor's personal correspondence, preserved in a separate box of family papers. Letters from Eleanor to her sister in New York, dated throughout 1910, painted a picture of a woman struggling with something far more complex than typical new mother anxieties. June 15th, 1910. The photograph session was arranged for yesterday. Robert insists we must have proper documentation of our happiness, though I confess I find it difficult to smile when my heart feels so heavy. James seems so fragile, and I fear constantly for his well-being. June 25th, 1910. I cannot shake the feeling that something is terribly wrong, though the doctor assures me James is developing normally. My maternal instincts tell me otherwise, but no one will listen to a new mother's concerns. The letters revealed a woman who was deeply troubled about her infant's health. Despite reassurances from medical professionals, Eleanor's correspondence suggested she had been experiencing significant anxiety about her baby's condition, even as her family insisted everything was normal. Most disturbing was a letter dated just days before James's death. I know in my heart that my fears were justified, though saying so brings me no satisfaction. I only pray that God will forgive me for the thoughts I have harbored. Intrigued by Eleanor's references to her baby's health concerns, Rachel contacted Dr. Margaret Liu, a medical historian at the University of Pennsylvania who specialized in early 20th century pediatric medicine. Dr. Liu had extensive knowledge of infant mortality patterns and medical practices from the 1910 era. Infant mortality was tragically common in 1910, Dr. Liu explained when Rachel shared Eleanor's correspondence. However, the mother's detailed concerns about her baby's condition, combined with the official cause of death, suggest something more specific than typical infant illness. Dr. Liu agreed to examine the photograph and the family records Rachel had gathered. Her analysis provided disturbing insights into what Eleanor might have been experiencing during the photo session. Looking at this photograph with knowledge of the infant's subsequent death, several details become significant, Dr. Liu noted. The baby's unusually still posture, the limp positioning of the hands, and what appears to be the mother's restraining grip all suggest the infant may have been experiencing neurological issues that weren't properly diagnosed at the time. Dr. Liu explained that many serious infant conditions went unrecognized in 1910, particularly neurological disorders that affected muscle tone and development. Eleanor's letters indicate she was observing symptoms that medical professionals dismissed, probably attributing her concerns to typical new mother anxiety. But her instincts were likely correct. The photograph began to take on a different meaning. Eleanor's forced smile and tense posture weren't just anxiety about posing for a formal portrait. They were the expression of a mother who knew her baby was seriously ill but couldn't get anyone to believe her or help her. The tight grip on the baby makes sense now, Dr. Liu continued. If the infant had poor muscle tone or was having difficulty maintaining position, Eleanor would have needed to support him more than would be typical for a healthy 6-month-old. Dr. Liu's analysis suggested that Eleanor had been living with the knowledge that something was seriously wrong with her baby, while being forced to maintain the appearance of normal, joyful motherhood for social and family expectations. The phrase in her letter about thoughts I have harbored is particularly telling, Dr. Liu observed. In 1910, mothers were often blamed for infant illness and death. Eleanor may have been carrying guilt about her baby's condition, possibly wondering if she'd somehow caused it or failed to protect him adequately. The photograph was beginning to reveal itself as a document of a mother's private anguish, hidden behind a smile she was required to maintain for appearances. Rachel's investigation took a new direction when she discovered Eleanor's medical records, preserved in the archives of Philadelphia General Hospital. The records painted a picture of a woman caught between her maternal instincts and the social expectations of her era. Dr. James Morrison, Eleanor's physician, had documented several visits during the spring and summer of 1910. His notes revealed the conflict between Eleanor's concerns and the medical establishment's dismissive attitude toward maternal intuition. May 20, 1910, Mrs. Kellerman. Reports continued concerns about infants' muscle tone and responsiveness. Physical examination reveals no obvious abnormalities. Patient appears anxious and may be experiencing typical new mother worries. Recommended rest and less intensive observation of the child. June 10th, 1910. Mrs. Kellerman insists infant is not developing normally despite normal weight gain and feeding patterns. Her husband reports she has become obsessive about the child's condition, suggested that excessive maternal attention may be harmful to both mother and child. The medical records showed that Eleanor's observations were being systematically dismissed as maternal anxiety or hysteria. Despite her detailed descriptions of symptoms that modern medicine would recognize as neurologically significant, Rachel found additional context in social records from the Kellerman family circle. Eleanor had been under considerable pressure to present a perfect image of motherhood. The Prominent Families of Philadelphia Society in 1910 maintained strict expectations about maternal behavior and public presentations of family happiness. A social column from the Philadelphia Inquirer, dated June 1910, mentioned the Kellerman family's recent portrait session. Mrs. Robert Kellerman and her charming infant son recently sat for formal photographs, capturing the joy of new motherhood that so becomes young Philadelphia society matrons. But Eleanor's private correspondence told a different story. Letters to her sister revealed the enormous strain of maintaining public appearances while privately fearing for her child's life. June 12, 1910. Robert has arranged for the photograph to be published in the society pages. He says it's important for business relationships that we appear to be a thriving, happy family. I don't know how I will manage to smile when my heart is breaking with worry. June 18, 1910. The photograph session was agony. I had to hold James so tightly to keep him positioned properly, and all the while I was terrified he might have one of his episodes during the exposure. The photographer kept asking me to smile more naturally, not knowing that my smile was hiding my desperate fear. Eleanor had been trapped between her knowledge that something was wrong with her baby and the social requirement to present perfect maternal happiness. The photograph captured that exact moment of internal conflict. Rachel's most significant discovery came when she found Eleanor's private diary, hidden inside a sewing box that had been overlooked during the initial estate cataloging. The diary entries from 1910 revealed the full extent of Eleanor's secret knowledge about her baby's condition and the impossible position she found herself. In May 25, 1910, James had another episode today. His whole body went rigid for nearly a minute, then he became completely limp. When I described it to Dr. Morrison, he said it was normal infant behavior and that I was being overly anxious. But I know what I saw. Something is terribly wrong with my baby. June 1st, 1910. Robert refuses to seek a second medical opinion. He says Dr. Morrison is the best physician in Philadelphia, and that my concerns are making me appear unstable. He's arranged for the family portrait to be taken, saying we need to show society that we're a normal, happy family. How can I smile for a photograph when I know my baby is dying? The diary revealed that Eleanor had been documenting symptoms that would now be recognized as seizure activity and neurological deterioration. Her detailed observations showed a level of medical awareness that was unusual for mothers of her era, but her concerns were being dismissed because of prevailing attitudes about women's reliability as medical observers. June 14th, 1910. The photograph session is tomorrow. I've been practicing my smile in the mirror, trying to look like the joyful mother everyone expects me to be. But my hands shake when I hold James, not from nervousness, but from the effort of supporting his failing body. I feel like I'm living a terrible lie. June 15th to the 1910. The photograph is done, though it felt like a betrayal of everything I know to be true. I held James as tightly as I dared, praying he wouldn't have a seizure during the exposure. My smile felt like a mask, covering my screams. Someday, when people look at that photograph, I hope they will understand what I was really feeling. The most heartbreaking entries came from the final weeks of James's life. July 10th, 1910. James is slipping away from me, and there's nothing I can do to save him. The doctors still insist nothing is wrong, but a mother knows. I failed to protect him, failed to find someone who would listen, failed to be the mother he needed. July 15th, 1910. My baby died this morning. Dr. Morrison says it was sudden respiratory failure, but I know better. James had been dying slowly for months, while everyone told me I was imagining things. The photograph we took last month will be all that remains of our time together, but it captures the worst lie I ever had to live. Eleanor's diary revealed that the photograph documented not a moment of maternal joy, but a mother's desperate attempt to maintain appearances while knowing her child was dying and being unable to get help. Rachel discovered that Eleanor's tragedy had extended far beyond the loss of her infant son. Hospital records and family correspondence revealed the devastating personal consequences she faced after James's death, consequences that were compounded by the social expectations and medical attitudes of her era. In the weeks following James's death, Eleanor had suffered what contemporary records described as a nervous collapse. Dr. Morrison's notes from this period showed that he attributed her breakdown to excessive grief and an unstable maternal temperament, completely failing to acknowledge that her earlier concerns about James's health had been correct. July 25th, 1910, Mrs. Kellerman remains in a state of severe melancholia following the loss of her infant. Her insistence that the child's death was preventable has created tension within the family. Her husband reports that she has become fixated on the idea that medical negligence contributed to the tragedy. Eleanor's own diary entries from this period revealed the full extent of her anguish and guilt. July the 20th, 1910. Everyone keeps telling me that James's death was God's will, that nothing could have been done. But I know the truth. I saw the signs. I tried to get help, and no one would listen to me. Now my baby's gone, and I have to live with the knowledge that my voice didn't matter when it should have mattered. Most family letters showed that Eleanor's grief was complicated by her family's desire to move past the tragedy quickly. Robert Kellerman, according to his correspondence with business associates, was concerned that his wife's continued distress was affecting his professional reputation. August 1910, Eleanor's prolonged mourning has become a source of social embarrassment. Dr. Morrison recommends that she be sent to a private sanitarium for rest and recovery. Perhaps separation from the familiar environment will help her accept the tragedy and move forward. Rachel found records showing that Eleanor had indeed been sent to a private facility for nervous conditions in the autumn of 1910. The sanitarium's records, though limited, indicated that she had been treated for melancholia and obsessive fixations about medical negligence. But the most revealing document was a letter Eleanor had written to her sister from the sanitarium, September 15th, 1910. They tell me I must accept that James's death was natural and unavoidable, but I cannot lie about what I witnessed. I documented every symptom, every seizure, every sign that something was wrong. If speaking the truth makes me appear mentally unstable, then perhaps madness is preferable to silence. Eleanor had been institutionalized not just for grief, but for insisting that her observations about her baby's condition had been valid, and that medical negligence had contributed to his death. Rachel's investigation took an unexpected turn when she decided to consult with Dr. Sarah Williams, a contemporary pediatric neurologist, about Eleanor's detailed descriptions of James's symptoms. Dr. Williams reviewed Eleanor's diary, entries and medical records with the benefit of modern medical knowledge. Based on Eleanor's documentation, this infant was almost certainly suffering from a severe neurological condition, Dr. Williams concluded. Her descriptions of rigid episodes followed by limpness are classic seizure presentations. The deterioration she described over several months is consistent with a progressive neurological disorder. Dr. Williams explained that many of the conditions Eleanor had observed in James could have been diagnosed and potentially treated, even with the medical knowledge available in 1910, if her concerns had been taken seriously. The tragedy here isn't just that the baby died, Dr. Williams continued. It's that this mother made accurate medical observations that were dismissed because of prevailing attitudes about women's credibility. She was essentially providing a detailed clinical history that could have led to proper diagnosis and treatment. Rachel asked Dr. Williams to examine the photograph itself from a medical perspective. Her analysis provided chilling confirmation of Eleanor's account. Looking at this photograph with knowledge of the infant's condition, several details become significant, Dr. Williams noted. The baby's posture and muscle tone visible in the image are consistent with neurological impairment. The mother's tight grip makes perfect sense. She was likely providing necessary physical support for a child with poor muscle control. Dr. Williams' analysis suggested that Eleanor's dark secret wasn't guilt or shame about being a bad mother, but the terrible knowledge that she was watching her baby die while being unable to convince anyone to provide proper medical care. The forced smile in this photograph represents something we still see today, mothers whose medical observations about their children are dismissed or minimized, Dr. Williams observed. Eleanor was living in an era when maternal instinct was considered unreliable, but her instincts were absolutely correct. The photograph began to take on new meaning as a document of medical injustice rather than simple maternal tragedy. Eleanor's smile had hidden not shame about her baby's condition, but frustration and anguish about being unable to get help for a child she knew was dying. In modern medicine, Eleanor's detailed observations would have been invaluable for diagnosis, Dr. Williams concluded. Her tragedy was being born into an era that didn't value maternal medical observations, despite their often remarkable accuracy. Rachel's research revealed that Eleanor's story had been deliberately obscured by her family in the years following James's death and her institutionalization. The family's efforts to erase the tragedy had nearly succeeded, leaving only the photograph as evidence of Eleanor's private struggle. Robert Kellerman had remarried in 1912 to a woman named Catherine Morrison, no relation to the doctor, and had successfully established a new family narrative that excluded mention of Eleanor or James. Family records showed that Eleanor had remained at the sanitarium until 1914, when she died of what was recorded as chronic melancholia. But Rachel found evidence that Eleanor's story had not been entirely silenced. Among the papers donated with the photograph was a sealed envelope that had been preserved unopened for over a century. Inside, Rachel discovered a letter Eleanor had written shortly before her death, apparently intended for future discovery. To whoever may find this letter, I write this knowing that my family will attempt to erase all memory of my son James and the circumstances of his death. But I cannot allow the truth to die with me. The photograph that will likely be the only remaining evidence of our existence tells a story that no one wanted to hear while I was alive. I was not a hysterical mother imagining problems that didn't exist. I was a woman who observed medical symptoms that trained physicians failed to recognize or chose to dismiss. My baby died not from God's will, but from medical negligence compounded by social expectations that forced me to smile while my child suffered. I hope that someday, in a future where women's voices are heard and believed, someone will understand what that photograph truly shows. Not maternal joy, but a mother's desperate attempt to protect her dying child while maintaining the facade of happiness that society demanded. Eleanor's letter continued. With detailed medical observations about James's condition and her attempts to seek proper care, her documentation was remarkably thorough and medically accurate, providing evidence that would have been valuable for diagnosis if contemporary medicine had been willing to consider it seriously. If this letter is ever found, please know that my smile in that photograph was the greatest performance of my life, hiding the most profound grief behind an expression of joy, because admitting the truth would have been seen as evidence of my own instability rather than my baby's illness. The letter was signed Eleanor Kellerman, loving mother to James Kellerman, who deserved better than the world gave him. Standing in her office late one evening, Rachel arranged all the evidence before her. The photograph, Eleanor's diary, medical records, family correspondence, and the final letter that had preserved the truth for over a century. Together they told a story that was both heartbreaking and infuriating. A mother's accurate medical observations dismissed because of her gender and social position. Eleanor Kellerman's smile in the 1910 photograph had indeed hidden a dark secret, but not the kind of secret typically associated with such discoveries. Her secret had been knowledge, the terrible awareness that her baby was dying from a condition that could potentially have been treated, if anyone had been willing to listen to her detailed observations. The photograph captured a moment of extraordinary courage and profound tragedy. Eleanor had forced herself to smile for the camera while holding a dying infant, knowing that expressing her true concerns would be seen as evidence of maternal instability rather than medical insight. Rachel called Dr. Williams to share Eleanor's final letter. The pediatric neurologist's response was immediate and passionate. "This letter provides clinical observations that would be valuable even today," Dr. Williams said. Eleanor Kellerman was essentially providing a detailed case study of her infant's neurological condition, but she was living in an era that refused to recognize maternal expertise about children's health. Rachel realized that Eleanor's story represented something larger than individual tragedy. It was documentation of systemic medical dismissal of women's observations that had probably cost countless lives throughout history. The dark secret wasn't Eleanor's shame, Rachel explained to her colleagues the next day. It was society's secret, the knowledge that mothers were making accurate medical observations that were being systematically ignored because of gender bias in medicine. The photograph would soon be properly archived and displayed, but Rachel had ensured that Eleanor's complete story would be preserved alongside it. The image would no longer be seen as a simple maternal portrait, but as a document of medical injustice and maternal courage. Eleanor's forced smile had hidden her desperate knowledge that her baby was dying while the medical establishment refused to take her concerns seriously. Her secret had been the terrible awareness that she was trapped in a system that valued social appearances over maternal expertise and medical truth. The photograph remained, no longer hiding Eleanor's secret, but revealing it, that a century ago, a mother's accurate medical observations about her dying child were considered less credible than social expectations of maternal happiness. Eleanor's smile had been an act of survival in a world that punished women for speaking medical truth, even about their own children. Her story served as a reminder that some secrets are hidden not from shame, but from a world not ready to hear the truth they contain.